And why is everybody vitamin D deficient? Right? We estimate 40% of the world's population is vitamin D deficient. It's because you essentially have no vitamin D in your diet, right? It's oily fish like salmon, mackerel, herring, and often have to be wild caught. Mushrooms exposed to sunlight. Some foods, like in the United States, milk and yogurt, cereals, are fortified with vitamin D, and cod liver oil. And that's it. Mother Nature had designed us early in evolution to get this essential nutrient, right, is to be making it in your skin. Our hunter-gatherers all the time outside were making plenty of vitamin D. You may want to know how much were our hunter-gatherers typically making, and what is the evidence for it? And I think that what gives us a good insight is that Maasai herders and the Hasda were evaluated, and they showed that their circulating concentrations of 25-hydroxyvitamin D were around 40 up to 60 nanograms per ml. So we're talking about 100 to 150 nanomoles per liter. To get there, you would need to be ingesting a minimum of about 4,000 international units of vitamin D a day.
Hello, Dr. Holick. You are a professor of medicine at Boston University School of Medicine and one of the foremost researchers on vitamin D. So, welcome to Modern Healthspan, and thank you so much for joining us today.
It's my pleasure, Richard.
So, Dr. Holick, you are both an MD and a researcher in vitamin D and have made many discoveries in that area. So, could you give us a little of your background and what started you off kind of studying vitamin D in the first place?
Yeah, I'm always asked that question. And the simple answer is that when I went to the biochemistry department at University of Wisconsin, I, like all other students, wanted to work in the hottest area. And back then, DNA had just been discovered. So I was keen to work in that area, but they had no interest in having a graduate student. So they sent me to Dr. DeLuca, and they said, he's working in vitamin D. And my response was, I have no interest in working in vitamin D. And they said, it doesn't matter what you care about. You're going to be working in vitamin D. And I met with Dr. DeLuca, and he, informed me that they were on the hunt to begin to understand how vitamin D was being metabolized. And for my master's degree, they gave me the responsibility of determining whether or not, like pigs, do humans convert vitamin D to 25-hydroxyvitamin D. So for my master's degree, that took me about 3 months to do the research for, I identified the major circulating form of vitamin D in human blood as 25-hydroxyvitamin D. And that's the vitamin D that if you go to your doctor to get measured, that's what's being measured. I also participated in the earlier development of the clinical assay for it with other investigators. I then went on to identify the active form of vitamin D. That took a year, and it turned out that the active form of vitamin D is produced in your kidneys. Now, why is that important? Because we knew that patients with kidney disease had severe bone disease, and they didn't respond to vitamin D, but nobody had ever really connected the dots. And it was actually a group in Cambridge, England, that had demonstrated that the kidneys were the major source of this active vitamin D. And I identified it as 125 dihydroxyvitamin D3. I have a chemistry degree, undergraduate, and so my roommate and I were the first to chemically make the active form of vitamin D. It was then used to treat bone disease in kidney failure patients. So kidney failure patients that had severe bone pain were wheelchair bound. The material that we made in the test tube that we gave to them turned out they no longer had significant bone pain and were able to get out of their wheelchair. That was my introduction to translational medicine. And it really excited me. And then I really wanted to know, after all of this, that vitamin D is a sunshine vitamin. And nobody really could knew at the time, how do you make vitamin D in your skin? What factors regulate vitamin D in your skin? So when I left the University of Wisconsin and began a residency, so actually went to medical school at University of Wisconsin after getting my PhD. Um, and while I was going medical school, I found it so boring. I was a full-time postdoctoral fellow and had published well over 40 papers over my 5-year span at the University of Wisconsin. I then left, went to Massachusetts General Hospital, did my residency there, and at the same time set up a photobiology lab, and then began the studies to understand how you make vitamin D in your skin, what is the role of skin pigment, sunscreen, time of day, season of the year, latitude on vitamin D production. And I continued to get excited about vitamin D when I realized something else, which was that your skin not only makes vitamin D, but your skin cells, your epidermal cells, have a receptor for vitamin D. And I wondered why. And so we started growing skin cells, epidermal cells in culture, and I added activated vitamin D that I had chemically made, and it regulated their proliferation and uh, increased differentiation. So I put my MD hat back on back in the mid 1980s and asked the question, what disease is out there of the skin that's hyperproliferative that is non-malignant? And the answer was psoriasis. About 1 to 3% of the world's population suffer from psoriasis. And so we introduced the concept of using activated vitamin D to treat psoriasis. And it is still the first line treatment worldwide for mild psoriasis, like in minimum areas like your elbows and knees, for example. And as a result, I continued my activities in the vitamin D field and continue to thrive in appreciating all of the health benefits of vitamin D.
Thank you. And it does seem it's a vitamin D. It does seem more complicated than the other vitamins. In fact, it's not a vitamin, right? It's a hormone, or maybe can things be both a vitamin and a hormone?
So, I mean, vitamin, as you know, is a term that was used, vital amines, right? Because when they first started identifying vitamins, they had an amine attached to it. And a vitamin is supposed to be a substance that the body can't make and that you have to obtain. But of course, that doesn't work for vitamin D because A, when you're exposed to sunlight, you make vitamin D, and B, vitamin D that you make in your skin has to go to your liver to get converted to 25-hydroxy vitamin D, and then in your kidneys to 125 dihydroxy vitamin D before it has its biologic action on calcium metabolism. But so therefore, it's a hormone.
Right. How long does the process take from the I guess the vitamin D precursor to go to the liver, to go to the kidney until it's actually active?
So it turns out that studies were done early on because originally it was thought that when 25-hydroxy vitamin D was identified, they thought it was the active form. But if you give 25-hydroxy vitamin D to a vitamin D deficient animal and look at calcium absorption, it would take about 12 hours for its maximum response. But if you gave uh, the active form of vitamin D, it actually only took about 3 to 4 hours. So when you ingest vitamin D or make vitamin D in your skin, it equilibrates in your body fat and then instantly gets converted to 25-hydroxy vitamin D. And within a very short period of time, within an hour or two, you could see the appearance of 125 dihydroxy vitamin D in the circulation that is then in your intestine, having an effect on increasing the efficiency of calcium absorption. So these were studies all done back in the early 70s when we had radioactive vitamin D and 25-hydroxy vitamin D, so we could show and trace exactly how quickly all this process occurred, and it occurs very quickly.
Okay. So making vitamin D from the sun. So a couple of questions on that. So there are obviously a lot of parameters that go into that. I mean, you talked about some of them, like the angle of the sun and the skin color. Um, so I guess a couple of how easy is it for us to make enough vitamin D from the sun? And are there any precursors that we need to eat? So could we be, if we were deficient in a nutrient, could we still fail to make vitamin D?
Yeah, all good questions. So it turns out that it's the precursor of cholesterol, 70-hydrocholesterol, that absorbs UVB radiation, so 290 to 315 nanometer radiation coming in from the sun. It's absorbed by 70-hydrocholesterol and converted to pre-vitamin D3, which is thermodynamically unstable, and it rearranges its double bonds to become vitamin D3. And that process takes a couple of hours. And so as a result, when you're exposed to sunlight, you make pre-D, which then rapidly is converting to vitamin D. In terms of angle of sun, it's worthwhile noting, right? If you're greater than 35 degrees, you basically, the zenith angle is too oblique. And as a result, all the vitamin D producing rays are absorbed by the ozone layer. So, for example, we're taught to go out in the early morning or late afternoon, get your vitamin D, and not to worry about skin damage. It's the worst time to go out because you're getting blasted by UVA radiation. You don't begin making vitamin D in your skin till about 9, 10 o'clock in the morning, and it ends at around 3 to 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And that's even if you live in Panama. And it's because of the zenith angle of the sun. Um, so the precursor of 70-hydrocholesterol, right, means that there's not really a nutrient that you would ingest that you could improve it. That does not happen. The one question, though, that did come up was, what about if you're on a statin where it prevents you from making cholesterol? And it turns out that all of your cells make cholesterol because it's important as a component of your cell membrane, and that includes your epidermis. And the statin doesn't get to the bloodless tissue of your epidermis and has no impact on vitamin D production.
So when the sun is used to make vitamin D, there's other photochemicals and other precursor metabolites that get created. Is it better to do it from the sun than through a supplement? Is there any difference?
A good question, and we don't know the answer to that question yet. We've been doing research in this area for a long time, and Dr. Sliminsky has done the same. He's found a whole host of additional metabolites that potentially have some effect. There's some evidence that maybe one of them may be helping to decrease the development of melanoma or squamous cell carcinoma as a result of being exposed to UVB radiation. We just wrote up a review on this, published in Nutrients that just came out, um, giving a whole host of different mechanisms involved. And to answer your question about how much vitamin D you make, so we did a study in healthy adults and showed that if you have your whole body in a bathing suit exposed to one minimal erythemal dose, so a slight pinkness to your skin 24 hours later, so not a sunburn, it's equivalent to ingesting 15,000 to 20,000 units of vitamin D. We also know the other answer to the question is, does it last longer in your body if you take it orally versus in sunlight? And if you take just a single dose of vitamin D, it rapidly increases and decreases within 72 hours. However, if you are exposed to sunlight, it actually goes up and it maximizes it around 24 hours and is sustained for at least several days. So the vitamin D that you make in your skin lasts 2 to 3 times longer in your body. If you want to know, how do I know when to go out? Can sunlight make vitamin D? Is we developed an app called dminder.info. So DMINDER.info. Um, and it was developed with a group out in California, Ontometrics. And it'll tell you anywhere, basically on this planet, when you can make vitamin D, how much vitamin D you make, and it warns you to get out of the sun so you don't get a sunburn. And it's good for your Android and for your iPhone. And it's free.
Is losing weight or gaining muscle one of your New Year's resolutions? For me, adding muscle is always on my list, and getting proper sleep is a key part of that. A fascinating study found that poor sleep can reduce fat loss by 55% and increase muscle loss by 60%, even when you're eating right. But Magnesium Breakthrough by BiOptimizers can help. It's the only supplement that combines all 7 essential forms of magnesium, helping you fall asleep faster and stay asleep longer. Unlike basic magnesium supplements, Magnesium Breakthrough is specially formulated for maximum absorption, supporting deep restorative sleep that helps your body burn fat more effectively. I take Magnesium Breakthrough in the evening so I can get good sleep to support my fat loss and muscle recovery. If you want to try Magnesium Breakthrough, go to bioptimizers.com/modern and enter promo code MODERN10 to get 10% off any order. If you subscribe, not only will you get amazing discounts and free gifts, you will guarantee your monthly supply. If making vitamin D in the skin may be better, it depends, it seems to hang around a bit longer. Would having like a UV light at home to make your own vitamin D be preferable to taking a supplement?
So we don't know the answer to that question yet, but there's a lot of patients, say that can't absorb vitamin D that will benefit from UV exposure. In the United States, there's what's called the Sperdy lamp that was developed by Dr. Sperdy back in the 1940s, where you would a family would go to a local pharmacy and buy this lamp and then expose their child to it in order to prevent them from getting rickets. And so there's a lot of companies now beginning to think of using LEDs because we demonstrated that LEDs, which have very good um, wavelengths that are very narrow of UVB, is very efficient in making pre-vitamin D in your skin.
Okay, so thinking about supplements, right? If we are often actually recommended to take supplement. Vitamin D is a supplement, as most people are deficient, and especially in the Northern Hemisphere in winter. Do you have any advice on how much to take and what form is best? Does it matter if it's a capsule or a pill or an oil?
So I'll give you two parts to the question. The first is that because the zenith angle is much more oblique in the wintertime. So, for example, in Boston, you basically cannot make any vitamin D in your skin from exposure to sunlight from about November until the end of March. And if you live in the UK, for example, almost 6 months of the year, if you go out and expose to sunlight, you won't make any vitamin D. In terms of supplements, we've done the studies and we showed that whether it be in an oil or a capsule or a liquid, for the most part, the vitamin D is bioavailable. And the reason is that when you ingest vitamin D, it's fat soluble. And so it has to get incorporated into micelles, into your chylomicrons, which then gets incorporated into your lymphatic system, which then goes all the way up into your superior vena cava, gets dumped in, and then ultimately gets to the liver to get converted to 25-hydroxy vitamin D. So how much? And so the Endocrine Society in 2011 recommended that infants require at least 400 up to 1,000 units of vitamin D a day is safe. For children, 600 to 1,000 units. And I think teenagers should be treated like adults. And we had recommended 1,500 to 2,000 units a day. Furthermore, if you're obese, you need 2 to 3 times more. And why is everybody vitamin D deficient? Right? We estimate 40% of the world's population is vitamin D deficient. It's because you essentially have no vitamin D in your diet, right? It's oily fish like salmon, mackerel, herring, and often have to be wild caught. Mushrooms exposed to sunlight. Some foods, like in the United States, milk and yogurt, cereals, are fortified with vitamin D, and cod liver oil. And that's it. Mother Nature had designed us early in evolution to get this essential nutrient, right, is to be making it in your skin. Our hunter-gatherers all the time outside were making plenty of vitamin D. You may want to know how much were our hunter-gatherers typically making, and what is the evidence for it? And I think that what gives us a good insight is that Maasai herders and the Hadza were evaluated, and they showed that their circulating concentrations of 25-hydroxy vitamin D were around 40 up to 60 nanograms per ml. So we're talking about 100 to 150 nanomoles per liter. To get there, you would need to be ingesting a minimum of about 4,000 international units of vitamin D a day.
And those numbers, I'm more familiar with the millimoles per liter. So the 100 to 150 would be a good target to aim for.
And the Endocrine Society in 2011, that I chaired that committee, we recommended the target minimum should be 30 nanograms or 75 nanomoles per liter, and 40 nanograms or 100 nanomoles per liter, and up to 150 nanomoles per liter or 60 nanograms per ml is ideal, but up to 250 nanomoles per liter or 100 nanograms per ml we consider to be the upper limit of being safe. We further showed, based on the literature, that you really have to have a blood level of at least 375 nanomoles per liter or 150 nanograms per ml to even be concerned about vitamin D toxicity.
What is the what are the symptoms of vitamin D toxicity?
So they're very subtle. And so your blood calcium goes up and your blood phosphate goes up. Those are the two major consequences. And as a result, you now start to calcify your kidneys, called nephrocalcinosis. So it starts to cause kidney failure. It calcifies your blood vessels. And the high blood calcium causes severe constipation, mental fogness, all kinds of other issues. But that's only later stages of vitamin D intoxication. Initially, when the calcium starts to go up, the body responds by trying to get rid of it. And so you wind up with what we call polyuria and polydipsia, so that you start drinking a lot more water to try to get rid of your calcium, and you're putting out a lot more in your urine. And then it begins to progress over time.
Does the vitamin D level change quickly? I mean, so I guess what I'm asking really is how often should you measure? Like once a year or
Right. So it turns out that it depends upon the time that you get the measurement, right? So we showed in the United States, we looked at over 3 million samples that were done throughout the entire United States working with Quest Diagnostics and showed that in the wintertime, the blood level is at around 20 nanograms per ml or 50 nanomoles per liter, and will go up to almost 30 nanograms per ml or 75 nanomoles per liter at the end of the summer. And and the blood level for 25-hydroxy vitamin D, its half-life is 2 to 3 weeks. And so typically when I was measuring in my patients, right, I would measure it at the end of the winter, like March, April. That really gave me a good insight if the patient was vitamin D deficient or not. But I always had all my patients on vitamin D supplementation. So there was never an issue with them being vitamin D deficient. But if you want to then repeat it, if you're treating them with vitamin D, and the way I introduced back in 1998 that we published in The Lancet is that if you give 50,000 units once a week for 8 weeks, it fills the tank up. And that's equivalent to ingesting about 3,300 units a day. I'm sorry, 6,600 units a day. And then I put them on 50,000 units every 2 weeks, and that's 3,300 units a day. And we could show that their blood levels, even after 5 years, was maintained in that range of about 40 to 60 nanograms per ml or 100 to 150 nanomoles per liter. So should you take it every day versus should you take it once every 2 weeks? It's still debatable. We think that vitamin D may have its own unique properties. There was an interesting study to show that vitamin D itself in culture will stabilize endothelial membranes, which can be a source for inflammation. And the thinking is that if you maintain your vitamin D level, independent of your vitamin D status, which is your 25-hydroxy vitamin D, right, that both of them may be very important for your health. But for elderly that aren't interested and they can't remember to take a vitamin D pill every day, my preference then would be make sure your vitamin D is sufficient. And the way to do that is you can take this 50,000 unit dose, which is the only pharmaceutical available, by the way, in the United States. You have plenty of supplements, but not pharmaceutical grade, is 50,000 unit capsule. And that's why we use that 50,000 units. Also, you may wonder, there's what's called vitamin D2, which comes from cod liver oil, which you make in your skin. I'm sorry, vitamin D2, which is made in mushrooms and yeast, and vitamin D3 that's coming from sun exposure in your skin and from cod liver oil and oily fish, for example. Is there any difference? There's a lot on the internet to suggest that you should not take vitamin D2. But it turns out, in my opinion, that's not true. We've done the studies to show that physiologic doses of vitamin D2 versus vitamin D3 raise the blood levels essentially identically. And we also asked the question, does vitamin D2 get converted in your kidneys to active vitamin D to the same way as vitamin D3? And the answer is yes.
Right. Interesting. Because yeah, I've always heard it has to be D3. I didn't even know what that there was a D2. Like it was one of my questions was, is there an
Yeah, it turns out that vitamin D2 was the first vitamin D discovered back in the 1930s. And all fortification was using vitamin D2. And believe it or not, even in the UK, vitamin D fortification was very prominent back in the 1930s, 1940s until 1950, when all of a sudden there was an outbreak of what they thought was vitamin D intoxication in infants that caused mild mental retardation, heart problem, and high blood calcium. And so as a result, laws were passed forbidding the fortification in the early 1950s. that spread throughout Europe and most of the world. And it turned out that the likely cause was due to the genetic disorder, Williams syndrome, which these children have mild mental retardation. They have supravalvular aortic stenosis, and they have hypersensitivity to vitamin D and high blood calcium.
One other thing that we're always told is that if you take vitamin D3, you also need to take K2. You should always take K2 with it. Um, is that correct?
No, that simply is not correct. Vitamin D is not in any way influenced by vitamin K, in my opinion. Right? The concept of vitamin K has to do with the way it works, which is it gamma carboxylates proteins. And it does it for your blood clotting, but it also does it for certain bone proteins. So it's been argued that you need vitamin K2 in order for the calcium that you're absorbing with the beneficial effect of vitamin D for it to get to your bones and not to your blood vessels. And there are some studies in Holland that have suggested that there may be an association with increased cardiovascular disease and cardiovascular calcification related to less vitamin K intake. But there's never been any studies that I'm aware of that shows that vitamin K2 helps vitamin D work. And in my opinion, that vitamin K2, by taking more of it, is going to make sure that it's so intelligent that it directs the calcium to go to your bones and not anywhere else in your body.
Interesting. Okay. Um, okay. If we think about vitamin D and aging, so does anything change in terms of the amount required or the advice as to how much we should take as we get older in 70s and 80s and so on?
So there's a lot of debate about this. And the 2024 guidelines the Endocrine Society came out, they suggested that that everyone should be taking 600 units of vitamin D a day, unless you have some disease process or hypocalcemia, for example. But for elderly, they said if you're 75 years and older, you should not be on 600, but 900 units a day. Now, that to me defies logic, in my opinion, right? Because you don't increase mortality when you reach the age of 75. It's because of chronic illnesses, including cardiovascular disease and diabetes, and a lot that are more likely to increase your risk for mortality. We know, because we did the study back in the 70s, that as you age, the amount of precursor in your skin, 70 hydrocholesterol, decreases. And so if you compare a 20-year-old to a 70-year-old exposed to sunlight, the 70-year-old is probably making less than 50% of what a 20-year-old does. So the question is it beneficial to be exposed to sunlight when you're an elder? And the answer is yes, because we and Ian Reed and others have done studies to show if you take elders and put them out on a veranda, expose their arms and their legs to sunlight, you can raise their blood levels of 25-hydroxy vitamin D. And it's good for them to be out in the sun because sunlight, it can increase beta endorphin, make you feel better, and it has a whole host of other benefits, including producing nitric oxide, releasing nitric oxide, causing your blood pressure to decrease to feel more relaxed. Now, do elders need more vitamin D? And the answer, in my opinion, is no. Because again, we did the study. We asked the question because it was argued that vitamin D absorption is decreased in elders. So we did the study and we showed that vitamin D absorption is equally efficient, whether you're 20 years old or 80 years old. But how much more vitamin D should elders take? I don't think they need to take any more. I think that everyone should be on at least 1,500 to 2,000 units a day or equivalent. And like I said, if you're obese, you need 2 to 3 times more. I personally take 6,000 units every day. my circulating concentration of 25-hydroxy-D is around 80 nanograms per ml or 200 nanomoles per liter.
Okay. Yeah, because I remember you said if you wanted to have like 150, that you needed about 4,000. Was that what you said? 4,000
Yep, 4 to
IU.
5,000 units a day.
Yeah.
And and here's another interesting observation that Bruce Hollis and Carol Wagner made, and that I kind of try to make as a significant point in terms of looking at evolution and how vitamin D has played such a fundamental role. We know that breast milk, human breast milk, essentially contains no vitamin D. Now, if you think about this from an evolution perspective, this makes no sense. And it turns out that Bruce Hollis and Carol Wagner showed if you give lactating women 6,400 units of vitamin D a day, they put enough vitamin D in their milk to satisfy their infant's requirement. So that's telling us, again, from an evolutionary perspective, that our hunter-gatherers outside every day were making probably thousands, 4 to 6,000 units of vitamin D in their skin on a daily basis and maintaining their blood levels of vitamin D as well as their 25-hydroxy vitamin D.
Yes. So one of the key functions of vitamin D is to maintain bone health. And also, as we get older, there is danger of having osteopenia, and the bones becoming weaker. So how is kind of vitamin D involved with that, and how what other supplements along with vitamin D should we use to maintain our bone health?
Right. So I wrote a review on this recently um, for bone health, what vitamin D can and cannot do. And I make it very clear that's, I guess, maybe can be sometimes a little bit upsetting to the reader until they go really delve into this. Vitamin D cannot treat osteoporosis. Okay? So what does vitamin D do? So vitamin D is critically important for increasing the efficiency of the absorption of calcium from your diet. Calcium is critically important for most metabolic functions, signal transduction. The body cares about your blood calcium almost more than anything else because everything is tied to it. So if you're not getting enough calcium in your diet, the body knows this and it instantly begins a process of trying to find calcium from someplace. So the first thing it does is that when you become vitamin D deficient and calcium absorption is decreasing, your ionized calcium slightly goes down. And it immediately is recognized by your parathyroid glands, the four glands in your neck. There's a calcium sensor. It instantly gets turned on, and parathyroid hormone is being made. Parathyroid hormone does three things. First, and most important, it goes to your kidneys and it tells your kidneys, hey, stop losing so much calcium in the urine. So it increases tubular reabsorption of calcium. The second, it tells the kidneys to activate more vitamin D. Now, how can you do that if you're vitamin D deficient? And the answer is that even tiny amounts of 25-hydroxy vitamin D that consider you to be vitamin D deficient can still be utilized by the kidney and the parathyroid hormone telling the kidney to activate it. So people that are vitamin D deficient can often be found to have a low 25-hydroxy vitamin D and normal or elevated 125 dihydroxy vitamin D. But you're not satisfying the intestine. The intestine's not getting enough 125 dihydroxy vitamin D to increase the efficiency of calcium absorption. The third is if you're not getting enough from your diet, and you can't conserve enough from your kidneys, then the last place, of course, is your bank, which is your bones. And so now parathyroid hormone will increase numbers of osteoclasts, and these cells release hydrochloric acid, cathepsin K, to destroy the collagen, and it leaves a hole in your bone. Now you're decreasing both matrix and mineral, and you're decreasing bone mineral density, causing osteopenia. And if you continue that process, you will lead to osteoporosis. So now you have another problem, which is that parathyroid hormone, when it goes to your kidneys to increase tubular reabsorption of calcium, it causes you to lose phosphate in your urine. And so now your calcium and your phosphate product are different. They need to be normal, just like making concrete, having cement and the proper amount of water and sand, right? To make good concrete, to make bone mineral, you need an adequate calcium and an adequate amount of phosphate. But if the phosphate is now low and your calcium is normal because you're getting it out of your bones, the newly laid down collagen matrix by your osteoblasts cannot get mineralized. Hence, you have what's called a mineralization defect. That mineralization defect causes you to have osteomalacia, or in children, rickets. Why is that important? Because not only is that collagen not structurally sound, therefore to increase your risk for fracture, but more importantly, that collagen gets hydrated like jello. And so often patients complain of throbbing, aching bone pain, especially in the wintertime. And they're often given a diagnosis of fibromyalgia or chronic fatigue syndrome or whatever. I see those patients. Most of them were vitamin D deficient. I would treat them for their vitamin D deficiency, and they'd have a dramatic improvement in their symptoms. So, long story short is that when you're vitamin D deficient, you increase parathyroid hormone, you increase loss of mineral and matrix. Any new matrix being laid down can't get mineralized. And as a result, you now have lower bone density, you have your structural integrity has been compromised, increasing risk for fracture. Now, when you treat vitamin D deficiency, all of a sudden you see an increase in your bone density. And you think, aha, I've treated my osteoporosis. No. What you've done is, because, like I said, when you lose your matrix and mineral, vitamin D cannot make matrix and then mineralize it, right? It can only mineralize your matrix. And so what happens in people that are severely vitamin D deficient that have osteomalacia, so this unmineralized matrix that you can't see on X-ray, instantly begets to be mineralized. And so now your bone density goes up. And now you improve the structural integrity of your skeleton. We had one patient that had a particular rare disease called tumor-induced osteomalacia, where the phosphate level was super low. And when we corrected that problem, increased the bone density by almost 50% in just a few years. Many of my Black patients that were severely vitamin D deficient, right, because their skin pigment is like a natural sunscreen, reducing their ability to make vitamin D. I could show very nicely 5, 10, 15% increase in their bone density within 1 to 2 years just by correcting their chronic vitamin D deficiency.
Okay, so if you're chronically short on vitamin D, then this will lead to osteoporosis, osteopenia.
Yep,
Um,
it puts holes in your bones,
right.
basically. Yeah.
Okay, and then we need sufficient calcium as well, I guess.
Absolutely. And so the recommendation, I have all my patients, 1,000 milligrams of elemental calcium a day. And it's important to know elemental calcium, right? Because calcium carbonate, which is typically that comes from oyster shell, right, is the most common calcium supplement. Only 40% of it is calcium. 60% is carbonate. Okay? And calcium citrate, only 20% is calcium, and about 80% is the citrate. So you need to read carefully on the label. I typically recommend try to get it from your diet. And for me, dairy, or now they have oat milk and other types of forms contain calcium, right? These are good sources of calcium. You definitely want to take your calcium pill at least with your food. Because if you have achlorhydria and you're not making stomach acid, or if you're on some kind of a medication for gastric upset, you often can't break that pill down because the acid will break it down. But if you take it with your food, as your food is being ground up in your stomach, so is the calcium supplement, right? For patients with kidney stones, right, would argue that you should decrease your calcium intake. But you have to understand the cause for kidney stones. And the major cause for kidney stones is hyperabsorption of oxalate, typically from spinach, for example, dark green leafy vegetables, getting into your kidney and then binding the calcium irreversibly and causing kidney stones. Population studies have shown that if you have a good intake of calcium, actually reduces your risk for kidney stones. So why is that? Well, the reason is obvious, right? If you take your calcium with your meal and your meal has a lot of oxalate, it binds it irreversibly and as a result does not get absorbed. So I always tell my kidney stone patients, you need to take calcium, preferably calcium citrate, because the citrate will help to chelate the calcium and decrease its binding to oxalate, reducing risk for kidney stones, but to take it with your meal. And so the other question that I'm often asked is, so doctor, right, elderly patient, I keep forgetting to take my calcium twice a day as you recommend. Can I take it once a day? My preference is twice a day because if you take a lot of calcium at one time, your efficiency of absorbing that calcium is decreased. However, that decrease is not as significant as only taking only 50% of your calcium pill. So it's better to take it all at once if that's the only time you can remember it, and preferably with a meal. But if you're able to, twice a day for calcium supplements is what I recommended to my patients. My preference is, though, 3 8-ounce servings of dairy, right? There's 300 milligrams that's highly bioavailable in a glass of skim milk, for example.
Can I just confirm one thing? Because I thought you said that if you have osteopenia, taking vitamin D will not solve it, right? Did I
So
hear that correctly
you
or not?
well, I mean, the hole in your bone that was
Right.
caused by parathyroid hormone cannot fill it in, right? But if you have unmineralized osteoid, it will get mineralized.
Okay. So it will help, but it won't fix the
Well, it
pieces.
depends upon it depends upon what the cause is for the low bone density, right? Is it due to loss of matrix and mineral, right? Hole in your bone versus unmineralized matrix. And the way you'll find out is that if you take vitamin D and you increase your bone density, you know it's likely due to osteomalacia.
So vitamin D is also required by the immune system, is my understanding. So could you talk about what is the relationship between vitamin D and the immune system?
So there's a whole other concept out there that we now understand, which is that's true that when you ingest vitamin D or make vitamin D in your skin, it goes through your liver and kidneys, gets activated. And that activation regulates calcium metabolism, both increasing intestinal calcium absorption. But like parathyroid hormone, active vitamin D will remove calcium from your bones, right? Because the function of vitamin D is to maintain your blood calcium. But we now know that activated macrophages, colon, breast, skin cells, all can activate vitamin D locally. And we believe it plays a critical role in regulating cellular differentiation and proliferation, and a whole host of up to 2,000 genes being up and down regulated, including your immune system. Long story short is we know that activated B and T lymphocytes have a vitamin D receptor. Active vitamin D will regulate cytokine production. It will increase cytokines that can help fight infection or maybe cancer, and decrease cytokines that can cause a cytokine storm, like in COVID. It will regulate, modulate immunoglobulin synthesis. We believe that's critically important because it downregulates the production of autoantibodies that cause autoimmune disorders. So we think that vitamin D is very important for both innate as well as adaptive immunity to help fight infections, cancer, and a whole host of other processes.
And you also said autoimmune. Was that correct?
So we think, because there's a study that was done called the VITAL study, where they gave 2,000 units of vitamin D a day to otherwise healthy adults, 50 and 55 years of age and older for men and women. And they showed reduced risk of autoimmune disorders by 22%. That's remarkable. And this includes psoriasis, rheumatoid arthritis, vitiligo, right? And so we think vitamin D is a fundamental in regulating your immune system. We did a study when COVID first came out of over 190,000 blood samples and showed that if you're vitamin D sufficient, a blood level of at least 78 nanomoles per liter or 34 nanograms per ml reduces risk of getting COVID infection by 54%. And a study done out of San Francisco, and we did a similar study at our hospital, reduced risk of hospitalization and mortality by 40 to 50%. So vitamin D, we believe, plays a very fundamental role in your immune system, um, and is a major immunomodulator.
Is the level for the immune system kind of the same needed for bone protection, or do you need kind of higher levels?
So that's a very good question. So it turns out, like I said, the body cares about number one priority, maintain your blood calcium normal. And so you can have a 25 hydroxy vitamin D of 50 nanomoles per liter. You'll probably still be okay in preventing osteomalacia, right? You may be losing a little bit of calcium out of your skeleton, right? But we believe that to get these extra skeletal benefits, you need to be at least 30 nanograms per ml, 75 nanomoles per liter. But the preference, we think, is 40 to 60 nanograms per ml or 100 to 150 nanomoles per liter. I just wrote a recent review in response to the 2024 guidelines, and I have a whole table showing from all of the different association studies what blood level you need to be at in order to have the maximum benefit. And for almost all other extraskeletal benefits should be at least 40 up to 60 to 80 nanograms per ml. Like I said, 100 to 150 to 200 nanomoles per liter.
Okay. And you aim for 200 for yourself. Was that right? That was the
Correct.
number.
Yep.
Okay. Is just we store a lot of vitamin D in our fat. Is the blood level a good proxy for how much vitamin D we have in our fat, or could we have like extra in the fat and we release it?
So we're doing studies right now looking at this in a lot more detail. And we had done a study many years ago with a Canadian group and showed that when you look at population studies and you look at blood levels of 25-hydroxy vitamin D, that if you compare a normal person to an obese person with greater than a BMI of 30, that you needed 2.5 times more vitamin D to get to the same blood level. We know that adipose tissue will store vitamin D. Your blood level of 25-hydroxy vitamin D doesn't reflect that at all. And the more important issue is, say, what happens if you get like if you have, yeah, gastric bypass surgery, for example. We did a study and showed that even though the fat there had huge amounts of vitamin D, it was not utilized when they lost 50 kilograms of body fat over a period of a year. Their blood level did not increase. However, we think that our hunter-gatherers, they made vitamin D in the spring, summer, and fall. They stored it in their body fat. But now they have less calorie intake. So now they're utilizing efficiently their body fat. And we believe as a result of that process, they were releasing vitamin D back into the circulation that they could therefore use.
Okay, so then in summary, the we store vitamin D in the fat, but it is not utilized unless that fat is burnt.
Correct.
With
Well, that's probably not completely true because we know that when you take an oral dose of vitamin D, that it goes to your body fat and then it's somehow equilibrated back out. We don't know what that process is. We're on the hunt to try to understand that right now. We just published a paper on this. Um, it's much more complicated. It looks like if you have a lot of body fat, the vitamin D prefers to be there. And so less of it is able to get out. But we think in the end that vitamin D ingested or made in your skin, in your bloodstream, is equilibrating in your body fat and released back out to your liver. Because your 25-hydroxy vitamin D level, when you take a dose of vitamin D, doesn't rapidly go up. It's very gradual.
Does vitamin D reduce inflammation? Can I get one more question in?
My answer is, like I said, it's an immunomodulator. I don't think there's any question that it plays a major role in decreasing inflammation. And as I had mentioned to you, that one study in vitro in cell membranes, it reduced endothelial, I mean, it improved endothelial cell function. And endothelial cell function is very important in the inflammatory process. So I believe that it very much is an anti-inflammatory agent.
Excellent. Thank you. So, Dr. Holick, thank you so much for joining us today. So, where can people go to follow your work? And if you could send me the link or where to some of your these recent review papers that you mentioned, that they sounded really interesting, I will definitely link them in the
So yeah, you just have to go to just drmichaelholick.org. And these papers are all there. I'll send everything to you. But just, yeah, DrMichaelHolick.org. No spaces, no periods after doctor. And you'll find me. And there are two parts to my website. One has to do with vitamin D and the other with Ehlers-Danlos syndrome.
excellent. Thank you. I will definitely link to that. Dr. Holick, thank you so much for joining us. It has been great talking to you.
Been my pleasure, Richard. Have a delightful day.